Islamic terrorism has continued to make a big impact on Western countries, and in Australia we've had our own experience of that as well. One of the consequences of that, it seems to me, is that it has led to people talking more openly about Islam and what Islam teaches, and consequently to an awareness that in fact there are very different schools of thought within Islam, and that extremists are not representative of the whole of Islam. It's one of the, I think, burdens that's been borne by the wider Islamic community. How are tensions between rival groups within Islam faring in your estimation? And is it reasonable to think that there will be a reformation, to borrow a word, it's not an appropriate word, but a reformation of Islam that will allow for modernization, increased liberalization within the West, the sort of thing that's called for by scholars such as Ayaan Hirsi Ali?
And myself.
And you.
You brought up lots of points. On the first one, yes, it's been a thorough education about Islam in the West and around the world. I mean, I don't know what your knowledge of Buddhism is, but I suspect you know a whole lot more about Islam than Buddhism at this point. It's part of our lives. And I find the terms I could not use 20 years ago, jihad, Sharia, Islamism, I use routinely now and are understood widely. That said, there's a broad bifurcation of opinion in the West, where the right sees, as with the Soviet Union, an ideological foe that is formidable and must be confronted. And the left does not see that foe, sees a potential partner, doesn't see ideology as particularly important, sees personality and geostrategic interests as conflicting, but nothing particularly larger. And so left and right have come to different conclusions. And there's really no conversation between them. The left tends to say Islam is not part of this is crazies. And the right tends to say this is Islam, the religion. I'm in the middle. I say it's a form of Islam. It's not all of Islam, a form of Islam. And I'm happy to say in the United States, increasingly that is a position that people given a thought are coming to as well. For example, in the 2016 presidential nomination for the Republican presidential position, virtually every single candidate spoke like I do. But more broadly, you see, it's Islam. I think it's deeply mistaken, but that is the increasingly popular position. As for your second point about reform of Islam, that's the heart of the debate between my position and the more populist position. They say, no, the Quran is the Quran, given by God, nothing changes. What you see is what it has always been in 7th century, 21st century, and into the future. I say, I'm a historian, I see 7th century Islam as different from 14th century, different from 18th century, different from the beginning of my career, and today. It's all the time evolving. And in my career, which now is 50 years on this subject, next month, 50 years, it's gone down. It's gotten worse, more hostile, more radical. But if it can get worse, it can also get better. And so what we need to do as non-Muslims is help the reformers and help the moderates and work with those who wish to modernize Islam. It can be done. And we have an important role. We can't do it ourselves, but we can fight the Islamists and we can help the reformers. Unfortunately, that's not the case in most Western countries. Both domestically and internationally, we tend to slip into a policy of working with the Islamists and ignoring the reformers. And so one of the main things I do in my job is to try and point out the problems with the Islamists and help the reformers, whether it be financially, or giving them a platform, or giving them applause, bringing their message to the wider public as well as to Muslims. It's very important. The reformers are the key. And there's every reason to think that they can reform. Let me put it, just in conclusion, in a comparative religious light. 500 years ago, the three major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all had some form of prohibition on interest and all had some form of indentured servitude. Judaism and Christianity not easily left those behind. In the United States, we had a huge civil war over the question of slavery. It didn't just happen. In Islam, there still is a widespread notion that interest on money, even if it's 3% a year, is riba, is illegal, against the religion. And of course, there's slavery in many countries. So it's not that Islam can't change, will never change, but it's behind. It's not been part of the modernization process in the way that Judaism and Christianity have been. But I'm perfectly optimistic that it can be. And so what we need to do is help those Muslims who want to make that change.
I think that's important work, and it's very hopeful. I think that one of the problems in the West when thinking about Reformation, using the analogy, of course, of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, but as scholars work more and more on that era, we come to see that in fact there was not a single moment of Reformation, but the Reformation was a process that happened over a period of centuries. I think that people who use the language of Reformation to talk about Islam are hopeful or even expect that there will be a moment of change. You're indicating, of course, and I think rightly, that those moments of change seldom happen, certainly not when it comes to faith and religious belief, a belief that is held by many, many millions of people. It's a process that has to happen. And I wonder to what extent we need to be prepared for this to take perhaps 1 or 2 centuries rather than 1 or 2 decades, and certainly 1 or 2 years.
I agree, and I came to the conclusion back in 2013 that Islamism as a worldwide phenomenon had peaked the year before and was on its way down. And it's now 6 years later, and I find vindication for that point of view. I think a couple of things happened then. One was that Islamists who had by and large cooperated together can no longer work together, whether it be Sunni and Shia, violent and non-violent, Republican and monarchical, or even personality, as in, for example, Turkey. Erdogan and Gulen have the same outlook, but they can't stand each other. Political war. So that's one thing. They fight each other in Syria and Egypt and everywhere. And I'm not talking about the West now, I'm talking about majority Muslim countries. And secondly, Muslims who have had the privilege of living under Islamist rule said, no thank you. I mentioned Iran before. Egypt is the most spectacular example where in 2013 the Egyptians went on the streets in the largest political demonstration in human history, who knows how many millions, and said no to Mohammed Morsi. So between these two, inability to work together and unpopularity, I think the Islamists are on the way down. That's not to say it's inevitable, it's not to say it can't go back up, not to say we can relax, but I think the tide has turned. A movement which began in the 1920s, 90 years later, is weakening.